Are you or a loved one Irish? If so, you may be entitled to a screaming fairy woman just before you die. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. Before we get started today, I feel like we need to inform you that it is very late, and this has been a consistent thing. So the way we've been waking up is with Mount Pocono Perk from... I was really worried it was going to hit me in the face again. Mount Pocono Perk from the Lore Lodge and Tableau Roasting Co. I won't go on a diatribe about it this time, but it's coffee, it's good, I designed it, we actually work directly with the roaster. Good stuff, you should try it. Anyway, to understand the Banshee, you really need to understand a bit more about Irish folklore. As opposed to folklore from the Mediterranean, the Near East, and even Northern Europe, the Norse for example, we know very little about Celtic folklore. It seems that the Celts themselves did not value a writing system to the extent that their more southern neighbors did, so what we have is a lot of oral tradition, but nothing much in the way of actual written tradition. We've mostly had to reconstruct Celtic mythology from the accounts of people from Rome and the early Christians, as well as a smattering of Greek explorers. Most of what we do know comes from Christian sources from the British Isles. One of those is the Leva Gavala na Erin, the earliest extant copy of which we have is from the 12th century, and that term means the Book of the Takings of Ireland. It involves 6 invasions that I'll go through, and the other big example we have here, the other good example, is the Historia Brittonum by Nennius, which describes the invasion of the area now known as Scotland by the Gaels. In explaining who the Gaels are and where they came from, he tells us about a few of those invasions, but it seems that the later authors may have either stratified it differently or added things in to match the Christian 6 ages of the world. And while the story I'm about to tell you does derive from Irish mythology and Irish paganism, it's important to recognize that it is a Christian source, and it was written by Christians with the intent of giving Ireland its own mythical past similar to that of Israel. The problem with that is, Israel has a legitimate historical past that we can fact check. We have far less sources from the Irish. The story of the takings of Ireland begins precisely where you'd expect. The Book of Genesis. According to the Leva Gavala, the origin, the forebearer of all Europeans was Noah's son Japheth. Now, Japheth's son, Magog, is actually the forebearer of a specific group of people, the Scythians. And finally, Magog's grandson, Phineas Farcid, is the ancestor, the forebearer of all Gaelic peoples. Now, as far as Scythia goes, that may be a foreign term to many of you. What it actually refers to is a region populated by nomadic horse riders who lived around the Eurasian steppe. So we're talking about the very northeast of the Balkans into what is now Ukraine, Crimea, and southern western Russia. The Scythians, of course, would not be a recognizable European group today. Any that were remaining of the Scythian culture as we know it would have migrated either into Europe itself, and by Europe I mean Central and Western Europe, or into the Near East via the Caucasus, groups like the Alans, for example, or the Sarmatians. However, by the time anybody was actually writing about Scythians, the Gaels were probably already in Ireland. We don't know particularly when the Gaels got to Ireland, we just have an idea that it was sometime in the last millennium BC, but we don't have a particular date for that. And furthermore, the ancestors of the Gaels would have long been in Iberia. For a long time, we didn't know precisely where the Gaels came from, but genetic testing and some similarities between Celtiberian culture and Gaelic culture, as well as several haplogroups that occur in both, suggest that they were from northern or western Iberia. And of course, today, that would be Spain and Portugal. So to me, it seems possible that this reference to Scythia is rather a tradition passed down relating to the Yamnaya culture from the same region, but in the Copper Age. The Yamnaya, much like the Scythians, the Sarmatians, the Alans, the Roxolani, all of these groups were nomadic, horse-based cultures who migrated into Europe around the year 3000 BC, during the late Copper Age and the early Bronze Age, and what they brought with them was the Proto-Indo-European language. But as far as this group goes, this ancient Scythian ancestor group, they are not really present in most of the story of the Leva Gavala na Erin, but they are supposedly the ancestors of what we know as the modern Gaels. The first people to actually be described as going to Ireland in the Leva Gavala are the people of Caser, and Caser is a granddaughter of Noah through his extra-biblical son, Bith. Now, there is no Jewish literature mentioning Bith. It's basically just a creation of medieval Christianity to create this story. Caser leads 3 ships to Ireland, but 2 of them sink in a storm, and her husband, and the remaining 52 people are actually then wiped out by the flood. Noah, wanting Caser to survive, but not having room for her or her father on the ark, sends them to Ireland for some reason, and they go in 3 ships, but 2 of the ships sink. The 53 remaining people are left in Ireland, and then they, of course, just die in the flood anyway. But that's all okay, because a man named Fintan managed to survive the flood with some pretty wacky moves. Aiden, would you like to know what the wacky moves were?
Please tell me.
He became a salmon.
What?
And he lived for 5,500 years.
What?
As a salmon. He became a 5,500-year-old salmon.
How?
Nobody says. There is no information on how the man became a salmon.
So they really just said, man, salmon, I refuse to elaborate.
Exactly. Oh, he comes back later and tells this whole story to a later Irish king, by the way.
As a salmon?
No, he turns back into a man, I believe. Again, there is no original written record of any of this.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, weird.
We're off the reservation.
Yeah. This is like if you took Weird Bible, which is our other show. By the way, you can go check out the Weird Bible podcast over on its own channel, The Weird Bible. We do that with Wendigoon. But this takes the Weird Bible and just puts it on Coke.
Not the drink.
Not the drink.
Unless it's the old original formula.
Now, it's important to recognize that Caser does not appear in the Historia Britannicum, and it seems that she was likely an addition of those 12th century writers writing down the Leva Gavala. That way it could connect back to the actual Noah story rather than just a different mythical ancestor. Nennius's work, Historia Britannicum, is of course from the 9th century, making it about 200 years earlier. It's an 11th century work, the Leva Gavala. Yeah. Alright, so anyway, all the times I said 12th century, I meant 11th. Here we go. Now, that said, there are some similarities to some Welsh stories that are better attested that suggest that this may have been adapted from an older Irish source that Nennius didn't have access to, but again, we don't totally know. The next people to arrive in Ireland are the people of Partholon. Now, there's some beliefs about Partholon. Perhaps this came from the name Bartholomew, and that was to relate it to some sort of Christian bishops or saints. We don't know. But Partholon comes to Ireland after it's been uninhabited for 300 years, which means just 300 years after the flood. He leads 1,000 men and women to Ireland, and they multiply to 4,000, according to Nennius, but according to the Leva Gavala, they actually multiply to about 5,000 men and 4,000 women. The Leva Gavala actually gives their exact route, and it is as follows. They came from Scythia via Gothia. Hard to say where Gothia is here. Then they went to Anatolia, which makes me think that Gothia was probably Thrace, which is north of Greece and Macedonia in what would today be the Eastern Balkans. And then they go to Greece from Anatolia, and then over to Sicily. Now, why'd they go from Gothia to Anatolia and then Greece, I don't particularly know. But they go to Sicily, and then they go to Iberia, and then from Iberia, they go to Ireland. As far as the other source, Nennius, goes, he only mentions Iberia. That said, if you're talking about a group of Yamnaya culture people moving around, it's entirely possible that they did follow that route, and what becomes really cool about this is all of the possible historical accuracies within these stories that we just haven't yet proven, but it gives us an inkling of what people thought happened, and oral tradition is a bit more robust than it's often given credit for. Anyway, they all die of the plague except for one guy who, you guessed it, turns into a series of different animals. The next people to come are those of Nemid or Nimech. These are, once again, more descendants of Noah via the Scythians, so Noah, Japheth, Magog, on and on. What matters is that they're Indo-Europeans. They set off from the Caspian Sea, according to the Leva Gavala, but that can't be right because the Caspian Sea doesn't actually connect to the Mediterranean, so they probably set off from the Black Sea with 44 ships. You're probably picking up a theme here that only one ship ever reaches Ireland. And that one ship that arrives carries Nemid, his 4 sons. Keep in mind there are 4 main kingdoms of Ireland throughout the medieval period. That one ship contains Nemid, his 4 sons, who will become the 4 ancestral chieftains of the 4 main large kingdoms of Ireland. Irish kingdom structure is funky. If you want to know more about Irish kingdom structure, go check out History Hut, our other channel. It's also got Nemid's wife and a smattering of other people who are just there along for the ride. They're colonists. When they arrive, they set up shop, and they end up getting into a fight with the mysterious Fomorians, who will be important later. They fight valiantly, but the Fomorians are too much for them and they're defeated, so according to Nennius, they went back to Greece. However, according to the Leva Gavala, they went to a few different places. Some of them went into the far north, some of them went east and became the ancestors of the Britons, that's not true, and then a number of them went back south to Iberia. Now, according to the Leva Gavala version, they go to Greece, and because they go to Greece, they end up getting enslaved. And what do? Well, the Greeks make them carry bags full of soil and clay. This may be a reference to the Helots, maybe a reference to something else entirely, but they carry these in sacks. They become called the Fyrbolg. What does that mean? It means men of the bag. Very interesting naming conventions here. They returned to Ireland after 230 years enslaved. If you're catching any parallels to the book of Exodus or the book of Genesis, good, because they're there. And then they escape, they go back to Ireland, and they divide that up into 5 kingdoms and provinces. But all will not be well for very long because another group of people comes back. Now, this again is one of those situations where the source material varies, but the Leva Gavala says that they come back from the north and that these are the Tuatha Dé Danann. Now, what are the Tuatha Dé Danann? We'll get into that in a moment, but this is the fun supernatural part of the story. And it is also the part of the story that I needed to get to for you to understand why a Banshee is not a ghost. You see, the Tuatha Dé are spiritually gifted, so to speak. That's how the Christian authors describe them. They defeat the Fyrbolg get sent packing, and the Tuatha Dé become the rulers of the island. However, they don't become the rulers of the island before having to fight the Fomorians yet again, and we still don't really know who the Fomorians are, or what they looked like, or why they're there, but if they are real, it's likely that these were people from the Isle of Man, or Britons themselves. Finally, we get the Milesians, and this is where the Gaels come back into play. You see, one of the Milesians is standing on a tower in Brigantia, which is in northern Spain today, and he spies a glass tower off in the distance. The Milesians leave northern Spain and they head up to Ireland, where they then have to battle a Tuatha Dé and Fomorian alliance, which is why I'm starting to think that maybe this goes back to something a little bit more akin to people from the Isle of Man and Britons. Now, you may be wondering about the term Milesian. It is believed that it comes from Milites Hispaniae, and that was the term for soldier of Spain, so these seem to have been soldiers from Spain. The Milesians actually do manage to win their battle, and they come to an agreement with the Tuatha Dé that the Milesians, the Gaels, will take the overworld, Ireland, and the Tuatha Dé will take the otherworld, not underworld, otherworld. This is an important distinction. And that's how we end up with the current Gaelic population. Now, of course, this is a largely pseudo-historical work. Nennius only mentions the Partholonians, the Nemedians, a mixed third group, which seems to contain people from Spain, and possibly is related to the Nemedians. The story that he gives includes bits and pieces that show up in the 3 non-included invasions of his work that are in Leva Gavala. I hope that made sense. And Nennius also includes the Milesians. So now that I've put you through a little history lesson, or a pseudo-history lesson, let's talk about the Tuatha Dé. As far as the Tuatha Dé are concerned, their name, the Tuatha Dé Danann, means the folk of the goddess Danu. But Danu is a reconstructed mother goddess of the Celtic and specifically the Gaelic peoples. She's not attested in any of her own mythology, we just know about her through etymology. And though we have no surviving mythology about her, there are theories about her origins, and many of them are again etymological via the Proto-Indo-European language group that formed most modern European languages, with the exception of things like Basque. Some of these theories relate her to the Welsh Dun, who was also a mother goddess of a similar number of gods. There's also an Irish goddess named Dinand, who's one of the Tuatha Dé. There's also the Irish goddess Anu, who is the mother goddess of the Tuatha Dé. Now, of course, Anu could be the actual mother goddess, and Danu is just a contraction of 2 words. That seems likely to me, personally. But of course, there's also a Vedic goddess named Danu, and Irish and, believe it or not, Sanskrit do in fact share a Proto-Indo-European root. That's right! The English language, the Spanish language, the Slavic languages, and the old ancient language of India, they're all related. They're all related. And finally, there's a belief that the old Latin word duenos, which is the root of the word bonus, might have something to do with it as well. What you should take away from that series of little factoids or theories is that we really don't know. Now, with all of the people who refer to the Tuatha Dé as something akin to Tolkien's elves, how do we know they're gods? Well, it's because they're cognate with a lot of insular Celtic, so Brythonic, and continental Celtic, so Gallic, gods and goddesses. Keep in mind, the Celtiberian peoples had a mix. They were primarily not the same people of Celtic ethnic stock, but they did have Celtic culture because it was brought down to them via the Celtic societies of Central and Western Europe. So some of those gods and goddesses that the Gaels, along with the Brythonic Celts and the Gauls, worshipped were, for example, Lugh, who is probably Lugus. There's also Bridget, who is probably Brigantia, Nuada, who is probably Nodons, and Oma, who is probably Ogmios. And as far as the reference to Tolkien's elves goes, the Tuatha are actually supposed to be tall and elegant and ageless and skilled warriors and capable of magic. It's interesting, Tolkien he actually said that Celtic mythology did not influence his work, but the Tuatha really do seem like very similar to the elves, more so than the Norse Alfir. But I will not pretend to know the mind of Tolkien. Due to their agreement with the Milesians, the Tuatha actually live in a separate dimension from the rest of us. And you can reach that dimension that we know as the Otherworld, and it has a number of names like Tir Naal, or Tir Nog as well, that mean different parts of it. So the Otherworld is not really one separate plane of existence. It's a number of different ones. And you can reach some of them by sailing across the Western Sea, which again, I want to bring in the historical and geographical aspects of this, as well as the mythological, because what do you find if you sail west from Ireland? Canada and Greenland. Did the ancient Gaels know about Canada and Greenland? We don't have any evidence that they did in terms of archaeology, but this little tidbit of folklore is at least worth considering. The other way to get to the Otherworld was to go through something called a Seethe or a She, depends on whether you're speaking Old or Modern Irish. The Seethe is what gives us the term Banshee. Banshee itself is just a word that comes from Banshee, which means woman of the fairy mound. Now, the Seethe, of course, is the fairy mound, and typically these were little rock formations out in the wilderness that it was believed the Tuatha lived in. And there are varying ones. Some believe that you can enter a broader otherworld through each of these. Some believe that each Tuatha god or goddess had their own otherworld that you had to specifically enter at their Seethe. This is why many of the various provinces and municipalities, principalities of Ireland have their own patron Tua. And the terminology that led to the term Banshee does vary across Ireland, but all of the terms do mean woman of the fairy mound. It's just that Irish has gone through a long period of evolution. So that's right, after that whole history lesson, we're finally at the part of the video that the video is about. The origins of the Banshee are, just like all of this other stuff, shrouded in mystery. But based on its association with the Seethe, you can make a educated guess that it probably has something to do with the Tuatha, and perhaps the Banshee even is one of them. But I decided that Wikipedia was not a good resource for this, and I didn't have time to poll every person in Ireland about their opinion, so I went to the next best thing, JSTOR. And on JSTOR, I found an article by a Patricia Lysacht, and this is from 1974, so it's a little bit dated, but the information in it is from even further back, so, we're talking about history here. But she wrote an article for the Journal of the Folklore Society of Ireland that was just a summary of the Banshee, beliefs about it, its origins, all of that, and that was my primary source for this section of this video. In that article, she argues that, and I quote, "The existence of Banshees was generally taken for granted. She was just there, and few people seem to have inquired about her origin. Keep in mind what that means. The Banshee was so common in the Irish consciousness in 1938, when most of these stories she gives us are from, that people didn't even really think about where it came from. It was like, going to the post office. It's just something you do. You go grocery shopping. You don't spend most of your time thinking about how that got started. Which is an utterly horrifying thought when you realize that the Banshee is a wailing spirit woman who appears just before somebody dies. She also says that in many cases, the origin stories people give for Banshees are so varied that they seem to be individual creations, just fabrications of whoever was asked, because nobody actually knew. Now, we have discovered a lot more about the Irish since this article was written, but not much more about the Banshee. I couldn't find anything that was recent that really changed anything that Patricia wrote. Now, one theory is that they developed in the Middle Ages as a folkloric item due to the Irish practice of keening, and what keening is a professional, often, not always professional, but often professional person, a woman, will come and wail and cry and sob at your funeral. So yeah, technically any woman could go keening, but professionals were sought after. It was literally a professional mourner. And there's interesting little details about it. For example, some keeners were worried that they would become banshees after their death just for being a keener. So that fear does imply that banshees predate keening, but again, it's hard to say. This is really a chicken and the egg thing. However, other accounts claim that a banshee is a keener who failed to do her job. So somebody who was hired to be one of these wailers, but didn't do it right, didn't have enough passion behind it, and as a result, didn't do the right thing for the person who had died. So it was a curse, a punishment for a human woman who failed to do her job. But as I said, the terminology, the woman of the fairy mound, suggests that the banshee is not a spirit or a cursed person, but rather something akin to one of the Tuatha. It's also worth mentioning that this other world that the Tuatha inhabit changes when you go from Ireland to Wales to Brittany. The Welsh version is much more similar to a separate plane of existence. You go into the other world and you're in a completely different kingdom that kind of mirrors the way society works in the overworld, but with different people in it. So now that you know that we don't know anything about the Banshee's origins, let's talk about its appearance, because we have a lot more detail about that. The Banshee is most often heard, not seen. But when it is seen, it's not really what you'd expect. Many modern depictions of Banshees in horror literature and movies and video games show them as, horrifying, scary creatures with that typical uncanny valley effect of a long face, fangs, wispy hair, kind of haggard. That's not really the way the Irish of the early 20th century, at the very least, described them. For example, an account from County Clare in 1938 by a Bridget O'Hara. Fun fact, my first girlfriend was a girl named Bridget O'Hara. Hi, Bridget, if you're watching this. I think we were in like 4th grade. She says that 2 men, both of them named Patrick, were just walking down a hill one night, late at night, when they saw a woman ahead of them, and she was weeping. And as they approached, they realized that she was wearing white clothes, and she had wings. When they finally got close enough to say something to her, she vanished. And the way that this is written, it's hard to tell exactly how she vanished. Maybe Bridget just didn't have that detail of the story and only the 2 Patricks did, but it kind of sounds like she just faded out of existence and they didn't even really notice her disappearing, even though she was right in front of them. And of course, as they continue walking, they hear her yet again, and they do manage to catch a glimpse of her at a location that is talked about as though we should know what it is, which means it's a pretty commonly known one, but I have no idea where it is. Anyway, she's sighted there, and the 2 Patricks get spooked and just head home. And then the very next morning, a member of the O'Brien family was found dead. This is important because banshees can be familial, and as far as those familial banshees go, they're typically associated, the named ones at least, with the big major families of Ireland, the O'Neills, the O'Briens. The O'Briens, of course, are descended from a man named Brian Boru, who was kind of the first real, true High King of Ireland. He was the first one to control the entire island by force, not just because other people said, okay, fine, you can be High King. And if you want to know more about Brian Boru, we have a video about him over on the History Hut. Go check it out. In fact, the O'Briens actually have a named familiar banshee named Avel. Now, how do you spell Avel? Precisely as you'd expect. A-O-I-B-H-E-A-L-L. Naturally. And then there's also Cleona, who is the McCarthy clan, and then Aina, who is the Fitzgerald family. And in this story, the O'Briens themselves also actually heard the Banshee. She appeared sitting on top of a bush just outside of the house, wailing right before the other family member died. So, one of the beliefs is that the Banshees actually walk from their seathe all the way to the dying person's house, weeping and crying the whole way along, which is, again, really not a fun image. And this same account mentions that another family, the Mulligans, had their own Banshee encounter, but in this one, it was heard and seen by several men, and Bob Smith, James Gilmore, and Joe Flynn gave chase, and then eventually she lost them, disappeared, and everybody returned home. Okay, that's a pretty good ending to the story. Psych! Everybody heard her again when they got home, so nothing really changed. There's a piece of fuzz in front of my face. In this case, the Banshee was described as a woman the size of a doll, with red hair and a red cape and a red dress and a color non-specific handkerchief. And she was holding this handkerchief in her hand, wiping her eyes as she sobbed. And from this account, we learned that chasing the Banshee off will actually not save anybody's life because the Mulligan family member died anyway. It was Mrs. Mulligan. And we have actually a pretty good number of descriptions of the Banshee. I'm going to read off some for you. Aiden, I'm going to need you to do me a favor. I'm going to need you to put a map right here whenever I change the county to show which county in Ireland it is. Should be easy. You should be able to get a map of Ireland that shows the counties. In County Meath, she is described as wearing a white cloak, having long white hair, red shoes, and a red comb. Familiar. Another description from the same county is that she is a small woman with a beautiful long face, long golden hair, and a plaid shawl. And then another account from County Meath is that she is a small woman with a shawl. So County Meath, pretty consistent. You could mistake golden hair for white hair, I suppose, depending on the lighting. In County Leitrim, small woman dressed in red. County Mayo, a beautiful lady with a white cloak and long golden hair. And another description from the same county, she is clothed in straw with a shawl on her head. Down in County Waterford, she is a good-looking woman with golden hair down to her heels, and also described as a tall woman with white hair. Keep in mind, Irish people, typically not blonde. Of course, when the Norse invaded, they brought a lot more blonde hair to Ireland, so it's possible, considering when these stories were collected. But an Irish person who's full-blooded Irish is rarely blonde. Moving on to County Clare, we have a fairy woman with long golden hair and white clothes. Fairy, of course, as a term in Ireland, often referring to the Tuatha Dé. And then in another description from the same county, she is sitting on a well with a white shawl, and yet another says that she is tall, thin, with long brown hair, a red dress, and a cloak. So typically we're seeing a lot of long blonde hair, white dress, red cloak, a few of these recurring themes here. But what about behavior? What's a banshee do? They're typically solitary creatures with limited exceptions. One of those exceptions comes from County Galway in the town of Carna specifically, and it tells a story about a mountain glen called Athnacain, I think, found in Connacht. According to the story, a battle was fought in 1798 near this glen, and locals from a village nearby decided, you know what, we hear really weird wailing sounds coming from the mountain glen, but we also don't really want to go to the mountain glen and check it out. So a man pays a young servant to go and look, except the boy, the young man, says, I don't need you to pay me. I'll go along just to find out for the good of the community. Don't worry about it. I don't want any reward. He goes, finds his way to the mountain glen, sits down under a bush, and then he says that he watched as a considerable number of banshees walked around the field where the battle was fought, collecting the skulls and bones of their people, specifically the people of their families that they were associated. Keep in mind, in Ireland, extended family structure, clans, all that. So they were collecting the skulls and the bones of their people, wailing, sobbing, moaning, all of that. And then eventually, once they had finished up with all of that, they turned and saw the young man. And they walked over to him and said, because of your faith in God and the fact that you came here without reward, you will not, I don't remember the exact verbiage, it was really weird, but it basically sounded like they were saying, not that they would kill him, but that they would haunt him for the rest of his days had he come looking for reward. Oh, I forgot to mention a little detail about the glen. Nobody who had gone there had ever returned. So the young man goes back to the village, tells everybody what he saw, basically is like, don't go back to that glen, and they don't bother with it ever again, but they do hear the banshees. And this paints them as not vicious or aggressive, but mournful. Now that we know how they behave, what kind of sounds, lights, and other various phenomena signal to you that there is a banshee nearby? One account that I will quote says, she usually has a light in her hand, and she's always crying. Another, she is dressed in white and comes to the house where the person is dying. She makes a great noise and sometimes knocks at the door, making a great rattle. So she's not just crying and wailing, she also will knock on doors, rattle things, but she won't come into your home without permission. Despite the fact that there's really no stories that I could find of people having their home broken into by a banshee, they would block their doors, which is a sensible thing to do when something's knocking and rattling at them. It's also described that the cry itself is not human. It's similar, it's close, but it's twinged. It's got some animalistic qualities, almost like a goat mixed with a wolf mixed with a human being sound. In County Cavan, it is described as a lonesome, unearthly cry, whereas in County Mayo, it is described as a mournful cry, the crying of a woman loud enough to be heard a very far distance away. And on top of that, it has regular hiccup-like injections. I'm not sure particularly what that means, but it is in the story. County Tipperary gives us a very, very useful description saying, sometimes it's loud and sometimes it's soft. Then over in County Sligo, it is a wailing, piercing cry. And then down, of course, in Waterford, we get the pitiful voice of the banshee calls out 3 times. County Clare, screeching outside of the window. County Wexford, They were a whale, something like a vixen fox, and it occurred 3 times. Now we're starting to see 3s coming up. In County Leitrim, it was said that the crying would go straight to your heart. So basically what we're getting here from all of these descriptions is very unsettling, womanly crying and wailing. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because this is a common thing in basically every nation and culture. Now, as far as summoning a banshee, when they appear, that's a little bit more complicated. There's a good deal of gray area here. The banshee typically appears when someone is near death. A County Wexford account, given by the victim, so to speak, son, says that his father was actually on his deathbed when the banshee came. He said that 3 cries came from the cement, and I quote, "and that cement walk, and I heard them as plain as I hear myself talking now." So people on their deathbed are typically those who hear the banshee. However, it's not only people on their deathbed. Sometimes you hear the banshee when nobody actually knows somebody is sick, because what the banshee is doing is signaling that someone's going to die. It's a harbinger, an omen. The banshee is not what's killing you at all. It's just telling you somebody in this house is gonna die. And if somebody's really sick, if they're on their deathbed, if they're ill, if they were wounded in battle, you can kind of assume who's gonna die. However, if everybody in your household is healthy and you hear the banshee, all you know is that someone's gonna die, and it could be any of you. And that's terrifying. One such victim was a man named Matt Gaffney, who was actually followed and haunted by the banshee for weeks prior to his death. And they tried masses, they tried all sorts of different things. Nobody actually knew it was him specifically that was going to die. It was his whole family that was dealing with the situation. But they tried masses, they tried good works, they tried blessing things. Didn't matter, Matt still died. Banshee did not go away. And then there's the fact that the people dying may or may not even be the ones hearing it. Sometimes it's just their family members. And sometimes even when the person hears the banshee, they don't necessarily recognize it. But other times, the dying person is actually well aware of what's going on, and sometimes it brings them peace. And then, of course, there's the familial aspect. An account from County Waterford claims that the banshee follows anyone with an O or Mac before their name. Of course, there are many Irish surnames that used to contain an O or a Mac, but now do not, so those people are affected as well. Why these people? Because these are the ones who are the purest Irish, I suppose, is the idea. The people who inhabited Ireland before the Vikings came, before the English came, and continue to exist and persist to this day. This account from Waterford also mentions the fact that the keening can be heard not just the night of the person's death, but for days or even weeks prior. And we start to see that 3s are common. 3 nights, 3 weeks, 3 cries, things like that. And of course, as I said, it's not only the dying person who sees or hears the banshee. Oftentimes it will be their close friends, their family, often people who are direct neighbors who would know the person very well and be attached to their family in some way. Even still, not even all household members will hear the banshee. Sometimes it'll just be a select few or even only one. And you may think, well, they follow Irish people, they're part of Irish folklore, they seem to be very connected to the Irish culture. Oddly enough, they do not follow Irish people out of Ireland. If somebody leaves Ireland, somebody who's Irish, and they die, the banshee will not be heard, which suggests, yet again, that these creatures are tied to the land of Ireland specifically, to their Siva, to their otherworld connection. So, if you leave Ireland and there's no Siva, then what are you gonna do? The banshee can't get to you. It can't walk on water. Maybe it can, it just might take a really long time. Something that also backs this up is the fact that banshees will also appear to people who are not Irish, but have lived in Ireland for many generations. One example was a Lyons family from England who came and settled and didn't even really bother to integrate with the community. They were kind, they were polite, but in sort of a condescending way, according to the account. And one of the members of the Lyons family actually had moved back to England entirely and had rented out the Lyons house. And yet, the Lyons were still plagued by banshees. Now, that may not be a fun thing if you're an English family, but as far as the Irish go, the banshee is actually kind of a badge of honor. If a banshee follows your family, it means that Irish spiritual realm considers you Irish. So, being pure Irish is a point of pride, so they like having banshees. So if you're an O'Brien, an O'Neill, something like that, a Fitzwilliam, a Fitzgerald, then you might have your own familial banshee. And if you don't know how Irish you are, but you hear a woman wailing and then a family member dies, congratulations, you're very Irish. And therefore it kind of makes sense, considering the banshee is a point of Irish pride, that you shouldn't insult or hurt one. One account that I read was of a young man. He lived outside of town, but he was in town, vibing, partying, doing his thing. And on his way in, he encountered a Banshee, and apparently he threw his walking stick at it. Now, he told everybody at the party what he had done, and then he walked home afterwards, and nobody saw him the next day. So they went looking for him, and what they found was that he was laying in a ditch where he'd said he'd seen the Banshee, with the walking stick impaled in his forehead. As we said, Banshee itself, not particularly horrible, not inherently evil, does not harm you, apparently unless you throw a stick at it, in which case it just bodies you. Another recurring theme about the Banshee that is possibly related to interactions with her is that the comb is recurrent. There is very often a comb in these stories. And in some stories, the Banshee is even just kind of sitting on a rock combing its own hair. This may sound like an odd detail to include, but in Celtic cultures and Celtic societies, hair is typically a sacred thing, or at least it was. Probably not anymore, but back in the medieval period, the only people who were allowed to touch your hair were your immediate family. Cutting your hair was a pretty big deal, and it could sometimes be seen as a sign of weakness. And in certain cases, like with the Arthurian legend, I can't remember particularly which one, feel like it's Colewich and Olwen, might not be, might be Tristan and Isolde. No, it's not that one. I think it's Colewich and Olwen. Eventually the hero, because Arthur is not typically the hero in Arthurian stories, the hero is allowed to comb Arthur's hair, which means that he has been accepted, that Arthur trusts him. Perhaps most interestingly about all of this, in my opinion, is that the article's from 1974, and it cites things from the 1600s up through the 1930s. And the conclusion that the author comes to is that the Banshee, even as society has secularized further and further, is still pretty broadly believed in. This is a very Catholic Irish society, very, very strongly believes in the Christian God, the Christian story, and yet they still believe in the Banshee, which is attached to this pre-Christian Irish tradition. So maybe it's just such a strong cultural element that it persisted even as religions changed on the island, or maybe people are actually hearing Banshees. And if you've gotten to this point in the video, you may be asking yourself, why is every version of the Banshee that I come across evil and terrible and murderous? It's probably because of a Scottish legend with a very similar name, the Banshee. Banshee, Banshee. Now, of course, Scots Gaelic is a derivative of the Irish language from back during the Middle Ages when the Scots moved over from probably Ulster, but all of Ireland in general, into a land called Dalriada, and they colonized Scotland from there. There's still some debate on this regarding the Dalriatans, when they got there, how long they were there, how much they intermixed with the Picts, what influence did the Norse have, all of that. But we do know that the Irish certain groups of the Irish did make a move to colonize what is now Scotland. And perhaps as a result, or perhaps because of completely different connections, we get the Banshee, which is similar in its etymology because Scots Gaelic is Irish. It is a derivative of Irish, as I said. You know what's a wacky derivative language? French, because it's German and Latin. God, I hate France. However, though the Banshee and the Banshee have very similar names, they have quite different descriptions. The Banshee is a beautiful young woman, but she's dressed in a long green dress, and that long green dress hides her hooves. That's right, her hooves. A common trope in Scottish folklore is that there will be shape-shifting creatures, but that they always have some sort of barely noticeable animalistic trait that they hide. Sometimes it's ears, sometimes it's a tail, in this case it's hooves. And in particular, it's deer hooves. And unlike the Banshee, who appears to people who are about to die and their close family, the Banshee isn't an omen, it's not a harbinger. It's a creature that appears when someone out in the woods, typically it's a group of hunters or loggers or something like that, somebody will express how they wish they had female companionship. And then these Banshee just appear out of the Seethe, and they come and they hang out and they dance and they seduce these men, and then as they sleep, they kill them and drink their blood. Being a poor Scottish hunter out in the wilderness and wishing that you had some female companionship, only for a Banshee to show up and kill you and drink your blood, is quite similar to being an employee at, say, Pfizer, and a beautiful young woman appears and goes on 3 dates with you, and oh, that's James O'Keefe. And of course, in one instance, it's not just that they sucked the blood out, it's that their throats were cut and their chests were laid open, so they really tore into these guys. Are these stories about an evil deer woman who comes and seduces you and then murders you? Perhaps. are these stories that people threw together because they found dead hunters who were ripped open and deer tracks leading away, and they probably just didn't catch the mountain lion tracks or whatever lives in Scotland? Also a possibility. I want to be very clear about that. However, it's important to recognize that this confusion where people think banshees are evil may come from the Scots Gaelic Banshee, not the Irish Banshee. So what you should gather from this video is that if you hear wailing and mournful crying outside your home at night, tell your loved ones that you love them because one of them might die. Also, if you're off in the forest and a deer-hooved woman comes out to get it on with you, you probably shouldn't do it. And with that said, if you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can subscribe to our Patreon for just $1 a month. And this is a fun month because you get to hear me tell all of this just plastered out of my mind on whiskey. And while typically we do Drunk Folklore the first Friday of every month, this one's gonna go out around St. Patrick's Day, because how better to celebrate? There are also other ways you can support us. You can check out our podcast, which is live at 7 p.m. every Sunday night. We have a massive backlog of about 80 of those if you've missed any. And you can, of course, buy our coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. The link is in the description. You can also check out our Amazon shop, where we have some goodies that we selected that we like, some, whiskey glasses, coffee mugs, books, movies, streaming equipment that we like. All of that stuff is there for you to check out. And if you liked the religious, biblical aspects of this video, or the historical aspects, you can check out the Weird Bible channel, and you can check out the History Hut. That's where we'll be posting stuff that has to do more with those topics and less with the folklore and the spooky. And that brings us to the end of this video. I'm Aiden Mattis. Thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.